Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. I'm Cristina Talaco, the CEO of Coalition for Conservation, and I'd like to start, as I always do, by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land to which I'm connecting from tonight, which is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I'll pay my respects to their elders, both past and present, and also extend that respect to all First Nations who are joining us in this webinar. So tonight we'll be discussing this very delicate balance between the energy transition and our precious environment, and the importance of thoughtful planning and community consultation when it comes to large energy projects. We're very privileged to have with us three speakers who can give their first-hand testimony on this. We've got two Jirrbal traditional owners, Patricia, who hasn't joined yet, but eventually she will, and Georgina Carney, who's here representing her community, and she will be sharing soon her perspectives with us. And we also have Steven Nowakowski. He's known for his breathtaking nature photography, but his expertise also extends to mapping. He's a cartographer, and he mapped various energy projects in northern Queensland to understand the impact that they have both on nature and community. So during our session, as I mentioned, Georgina will say a few words about the projects that her community is opposing and what they feel about these projects and why they shouldn't go ahead. And after that, Steven will deliver a PowerPoint presentation for us, and he will be covering the relationship between energy projects, environmental preservation, community well-being. And Steven will also shed some light on the importance of supporting, of course, the sound and sustainable renewable projects that might be out there and those that can contribute to our fight against climate change, while at the same time we have to take a firm stance against projects that pose a threat to vital ecosystems or indigenous territories and agricultural lands. So following his presentation, you will have the opportunity to engage in this Q&A session. So feel free to type your questions during the webinar into the Q&A box throughout the webinar. And now, without further ado, I'd like to first extend a very warm virtual welcome to Georgina and thank her for joining us tonight, and ask her to start sharing with us some of her insights and the sentiments of the Jirrbal people.
Hello, everyone. Well, I guess it's been a really difficult journey as well as a learning process for us as Indigenous people. This is not something we're used to or we get involved with. But I feel that I've had to get involved purely from a cultural sense, because there is so much at stake for us with the destruction of country. And that not only affects our ability to go on country and practice culture, but it also affects how we are able to teach the next generation's culture. Because without country, it's going to be near impossible for us to pass down our cultural knowledge, which for Jirrbal people is very fragile at the moment. And it's actually on a knife's edge. It could go either way, and we are trying to bring it back to being normal and an everyday thing, rather than something that happens on a special occasion or when there's elders around that still carry that culture that brings it to us. We want to bring it back home for our younger generation, because it's not only our identity, but it's our spirituality, you know, and seeing the ways of the world and how these processes happen is a foreign language to us. So it's not easy for us to accept or understand. We don't have that understanding of greener energy, because we're a civilization where our old people traveled with the seasons, you know, so we never stay in one place too long. We go to a certain place at a certain time of year for a certain food or a certain ceremony, and then we'd be gone, and then it'll be ready for the next season, but in that time it's regenerated by itself. So this is not something, human interference is not something we really understand. It's quite difficult for us. Yeah.
And just to give background to those people who are attending, who are not really acquainted, because what's happening up in the northern Queensland area may not be something that everybody knows. And I first of all want to, of course, welcome Trish, who just joined us as well. Thank you for joining us, Trish. We're listening from Georgina. Perhaps give us some feedback. Maybe I'll get Steven to give some feedback on the project that you were specifically talking about, which has been affecting your community.
Yeah, so Georgina and Trish, Jirrbal, and their country covers an area where a wind farm has just recently been constructed, and it's going through the commissioning stage right now, and that's called the Caban wind farm. And that wind farm was done in such a way that I believe was deceitful to the local community and the indigenous people. And no one really understood the scale of that particular project, because up here we were quite familiar with the Windy Hill wind farm, which are very, very small turbines, you know, about 20, 30 metres high. I don't think people really understood the scale of the Caban wind farm. And then now, and no one understood the height of these things. These are 275 metres high. They have red lights that flash at night. So now this big chunk of country is being illuminated as an industrial site at night time. We don't know what the impact of that is on things like bats and birds. And then more recently, we've got the Shulumban wind farm that has come along. And again, there's been really no capacity for anybody to have any meaningful input into these projects. So these are the projects that Georgina and Trish are talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Trish, if you would like to say a few words, Georgina was explaining a little bit about the cultural side that's being affected with these projects. And I wanted to hear from you, your point of view and what your family and your community think about it. And how did these projects were communicated with your people? And I'll just ask you to unmute yourself if you're able to, Trish. Georgina, you can also participate in this conversation, and then we'll watch Steven's slides, which will give people an idea of the land where these projects are and what's actually happening there. Yes, Trish, and welcome.
No, you're still on mute, Trish.
Now you're unmuted. Maybe you have to put the volume up if you can. Yeah. And while she's doing that, Georgina, would you like to explain the consultation for the project and how you've been approached?
With the Jirrbal people that's in the direct vicinity of these turbines, we weren't consulted. And in our law, it's you have to speak to the elders first. The elders need to be consulted before it goes anywhere else, before it becomes public, before there's even a negotiation. Like, even if the idea is put on the table, it shouldn't go anywhere else until the elders have spoken. So with us, I found out by pure accident because there was a meeting being held at Ravenshoe in the town hall and was advertised on Facebook. So my immediate reaction was, holy crap, how come we don't know about this? And then I started going around in a panic, speaking to my elders who had no idea. So for us, there was no consultation. Butter, the PBC, who's the big player in this, never consulted with the general public, like the general Jirrbal people. They just, it was pretty much done with their board members and their the members of their corporation. There was no consultation with the common people. So for all of us, we were all in shock and we didn't know what to do. And by this stage, it had been in negotiations for about, I think it was a year or two before we even found out about it.
Understand.
So, yeah.
Well, what about if maybe Steven can start maybe showing a little more in detail some of these projects and how, and we can sort of in the middle of it, if you want, Georgina, say a few words about the slides, you can also do that. And Trish, I'm sorry you're unable to unmute yourself, but
Yes.
we'll try and fix
Well, there
it.
you go. There you go, Trish. Hi.
Hear her.
Hi, Trish. No, okay. I'll go to the slideshow.
Okay, let's do that. And there's a few questions coming into the chat, but it's a bit early to answer them before you do your slideshow. And we can understand a little bit about the impact of these projects by looking at the mapping you've done.
Yep. Okay, so can you see the full screen there?
Yes.
Yep, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll go through this fairly quickly because it is being recorded, so people can stop on certain slides and take more time. But what are the impacts of poorly planned industrial scale renewable projects in Queensland, and what are the options? And I had no interest, and a lot of people, you know, even Georgina and Trish, we sort of, none of us had any interest in energy until really, well, for me, 2017, but for Georgina and Trish, probably up in only, 2-3 years ago. And I had no interest in energy, and I was fully supportive of renewable energy. We need to decarbonise, reduce our emissions, and the Mount Emerald wind farm, which is close to me, was the very first industrial scale wind farm for Queensland. And this was being constructed in 2017, and I was engaged to take a few photographs for the owners, which is Ratch, and that's a Thai-owned company. So what we're looking at here is one of the blades that is going up to the Mount Emerald wind farm, and this blade here is 57 metres long. It's 12 tonne, and this is really one of the first generation of blades. Now, the new generation of wind farms, these turbines are twice as big. So the new wind turbines, those blades are 87, 89 metres long. So for example, at Caban, those blades are 87 metres long, which is effectively nearly twice the length of this blade. So the reason why I'm showing this photo is because you need to understand that these blades and the componentry need to get into really remote, rugged areas onto the tops of mountains where there's a wind resource. So in Queensland, we don't have much wind. There is wind out west, but there's no wind really, not strong wind resource down the coast, except when you get up into higher elevation. So the Mount Emerald Plateau, I'd walked across many times with friends, botanists, and it was a beautiful wonderland of wildflowers that had been untouched. Cattle had never been in there, had never been grazed. Fairly poor soils, which meant the country was quite heathy and had beautiful diverse heath country vegetation. Beautiful place. This was back in 2004. And that plateau now is a network of roads, transmission lines, substations, and lay-down pads. And you can see a bus there in the middle right. That's a big bus, a school bus, to give you a sense of scale. Now, you have to understand the new wind farms, so the Caban wind farm, the proposed Shilumban wind farm, and all the other wind farms, those turbines will be twice as large as these ones. This is some footage of the Mount Emerald wind farm under construction. And the rock there is so hard that they had to blast it out with TNT. So, whoops. yeah, so that's slideshow. So that's what they had to do at Mount Emerald. And even though I witnessed the construction of Mount Emerald, I thought, well, that's the price we need to pay for renewables. And the proponents and government were saying, well, that wind farm was going to provide power to 70,000 homes. And I thought, well, that's great. We're all carbon neutral now. I was naive to think that that wind farm would power all of our homes 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And I thought, okay, well, that's great. You know, we're now carbon neutral. And then a few years later, I heard about Caban. And unbeknown to anyone really, you know, including Georgina and Patricia, we didn't really know much about Caban. And I got a tip off from someone saying, look, there's bulldozers in there now, go in there and get some photos because they're going to make a mess of the site. And because I'd witnessed the destruction of Mount Emerald, and I know how brutal the industry is on the landscape, I thought, geez, I better go and document it because I know how bad these wind farms are. And as you can see, I captured the dozers moving into this forest, beautiful, again, high elevation forest, clearing hundreds of hectares of really good forest. And you can see the clearing of the forest for the wind turbines. This is only a small wind farm. It only consists of 28 turbines. That's moving on to one of the high knolls, clearing the knoll. They've actually blasted all that out, or they've broken all that out. The top of that knoll there's been completely annihilated with rock breaking machines. And this is what they do to the ridge lines. So this is Caban, the ridge line. There's no sediment control, no erosion control. You have to remember that these wind farms are exempt from the Vegetation Management Act, the Nature Conservation Act, the reef regulations. They've got a streamlined approval process here in Queensland called the State Code 23 for wind farms. And it's basically a one-stop shop where developers can get a very streamlined process through the state approval process. So as you can see, there's some really big civil earth moving involved in wind farms. And like I said before, these wind farms need to go up into the high ridges, high elevation areas of Queensland where there's a bit of a wind resource. And it's these areas that have been saved from urbanisation, industrialisation, and heavy industry and high value agriculture. Now, as you can see here, it's the fragmentation of forests. So pushing in a network of roads through pristine forest. This is beautiful forest that really didn't have many weeds. It was in really good nick. And so it's not necessarily about the land clearing itself, but it's the fragmentation of forests and pushing in hundreds of kilometres of brand new roads. And I'll talk about that a bit more later in the presentation. And as you can see here, they need to clear really wide swathes through the forest to get that really heavy componentry into the site. So those blades there, they're 89 metres long to give you a sense of scale. And the nacelle, the centre gearbox in these turbines, the 5 megawatt turbines, those nacelles, those centre gearboxes, they're 300 tonne. So the engineering and the civil construction for wind farms need to be designed, the roads need to be designed to be able to get trucks that can tow and carry loads up to 300 tonne. So that's why the gradients need to be in such a way, and that's why so much blasting and rock breaking needs to take place along ridge lines to get the components in.
Well, Steven, are there many First Nations living around this area, or what is the real impact on community? Of course, there's an impact on nature. We're watching this and we're seeing this. I'm quite hard, actually, because I haven't seen all your slides like this before. But in terms of community and the effect on these communities, are you seeing a lot of that happening already?
Well, I'll speak first, but there's been an impact on the communities of Ravenshoe, Toomoolin, Caban and Evelyn. And I know that 3 families have already moved away from Ravenshoe. And in fact, the local hairdresser in Ravenshoe has moved because they can't deal with the infrasound and the noise from these turbines. And the industrialisation. People used to look out their back windows and see the night sky, but that night sky doesn't exist anymore. There's red flashing lights, which are the aviation lights. And Georgina might want to talk more about that.
Yeah, I live out on the opposite side of Ravenshoe, the opposite side to Caban, and I can go out onto my driveway and I'm looking straight at these red lights at night. You know, Ravenshoe was once known for its green rolling hills, and now you look around and you just see these things. It's not easy. It's a constant reminder of the destruction, not only of environment, but, you know, those culturally sacred places that should have never been touched. So it's pretty hard and it affects everyone. And I noticed where I live, it's 25 kilometres on the opposite side of Ravenshoe, but there's now a lot more sugar gliders coming in to my place where it's a lot drier and there isn't much food around for them. And I believe that that's due to these turbines at Caban.
Yeah.
They're trying to get away from it, yeah.
Okay, and there's a question here on how is the power from these wind farms being distributed, and who's buying the power? You know, is it going straight to the grid?
Yeah, well, that's right. So, the owner of this wind farm is Neoen, so it's a French company, and they actually got a $40 million interest-free loan. Well, it's not actually a loan, but the Palaszczuk government Sugar gave them a sweetener for them to proceed with this development by initiating a $40 million capital expenditure in upgrading the transmission line to make this project work. So taxpayers have put $40 million into this project in improving the transmission infrastructure. And then the power is being bought by CleanCo, which is the green electricity arm of the state government. So the state government have Ergon, and then the green arm of that is CleanCo, and they manage the hydro dams and now the wind farms. So they've got a power purchasing agreement for the electricity coming out of this wind farm.
Thank you, Steven. You may continue your...
Yeah, so and that was Caban. And then I thought, well, you know, what's next? And these are all the projects in the pipeline for North Queensland. And this is really hard to find on the internet. I'm involved with an organisation called Rainforest Reserves Australia. And it took us many, many weeks to scour the internet and websites and the EPBC web portal to try to find what projects are proposed for our area. And no one in our local community or in North Queensland would know that these projects that I've got on the screen here are basically in the pipeline. You know, they've either been approved by state or they're awaiting EPBC approval. And just with those projects alone, there's 14,000 hectares of classified remnant forest to be cleared. So if all these projects were to proceed, that's how much forest will be cleared for these projects.
So, Steven, how did you find out about all of these projects?
By searching the EPBC web portal or searching, really going through the websites of all the proponents. So you go to Squadron Energy, Neoen, DP Energy, Tag Energy, you go to all their websites, and they usually advertise what projects they're working on. And then you go, okay, oh, there's a new project. And we just found a new project last week called Hidden Valley Wind Farm. And we just found that by chance by looking at the Project E, which is another company. And we looked at their website, Hidden Valley. I know Hidden Valley really well. It's a beautiful big chunk of land just north of Paluma. And you go, God, And on their website, they say that they're very well advanced in the planning stages of the Hidden Valley wind farm, but no one knows about it. We just found it by chance.
So how do you, and do you know much about how they get these approvals? I mean, it sounds like
Well, that's so the way they get these approvals is this, I can only talk for Queensland. I don't know what happens in New South Wales or other states. But in Queensland, renewable energy projects are all code accessible at local council level. So what that means is that that doesn't go to a vote in council, and there's no opportunity for local residents or conservation groups or our Indigenous friends to have any input at local council level. All renewable projects, solar and wind and BESS, excluding BESS, I think that loophole is going to get changed very soon. Wind farms and solar farms are code accessible under local council legislation, so the Integrated Planning Act and the local planning laws. So they go straight through council, they go to state, and then at state level, they go to the State Code 23, which is your one-stop shop. These projects are exempt from all the environmental legislation that we've fought decades to try to get. And then they go straight to the federal government. And at the federal government, we've got the EPBC Act. And that is the only mechanism in place to stop a project. But no wind farm or solar farm has been stopped under the EPBC. We've seen the Robbins Island development, for example, get stalled a little bit at federal level. And Shulumban's really going to be a test case. That's going to be a real test case. So if a wind farm doesn't have a threatened species or a vulnerable species or endangered, well, then it doesn't trigger the EPBC Act, the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Act, and therefore it just completely gets approved. So at 3 tiers of government, it all gets approved like that, very, very easily.
It's no wonder there's so many projects on the pipeline that we don't know about.
That's right, yes. And it's the developers don't want the public to know about these projects. They're doing a very good job at keeping these projects quiet, getting all the approvals in place, or trying to get it all approved to a point where they've already spent so much money that they say to state, we've already spent, $2 million on feasibility studies and the wind monitoring studies. And it just puts a lot of pressure on state and federal just to even more so fast track it. What we saw there is Shulumban. So what we're looking here, this is the next project up here that's in the pipeline. And this is very close to the hearts of our Jirrbal friends, Georgina and Patricia. And this is the country that's going to get carved up into what was going to be 94 wind turbines. But now it's been scaled back to 44 turbines from our public pressure. And so this is the sort of country that's going to get carved up. So this is an aerial view of the Shulumban site. The left-hand side of this image is the Wet Tropics World Heritage Area, and the right-hand side is Wurrura Station, where the wind turbines are proposed. And initially, this is what the proponents give us, is just a mud map. And they have these lines, which they call access tracks. But as you saw in those previous photographs, they're not access tracks. These are really big civil engineered roads to get 300-ton nacelle units up the tops of mountains. And so this is the way that the wind industry sort of shows itself to the public, that, they're just little access tracks and we'll utilize existing access tracks. But it's not like that at all. And because I'm a cartographer, I'm able to do a bit more mapping, because the proponents don't give us much information, and the state government give us nothing. If you try to talk to the state government and request a mapping for all the projects in the pipeline, or detailed mapping of a particular project, you'll get nothing. So we do our own mapping. And so we do that. And then we overlay onto topographic maps. And then when you do that, you start to realize what's really going on here. So you can see where the turbines are going on tops of the knolls and the mountains, and they're utilising ridge lines to push roads across ridge lines to get to high peaks. And then if we look at the elevation mapping again, we can see that those turbines are going into the yellow areas, which are 800 to 900 metres above sea level, really high areas. And if we don't do this mapping, the community doesn't know. And then when we do further mapping, we see that the turbines are going into endangered ecosystems.
Right.
You know, but I just want to put a disclaimer in here that this plan has now been changed. Just recently, the proponents have moved the turbines outside of the endangered ecosystem area. And that's been not necessarily from us pushing back against this particular project and the inappropriate placement of the turbines, but it's really from the Wet Tropics Management Authority and the World Heritage Management Authority. And they're saying, hey, this is not on. You've got to really push those turbines back, get those turbines away from the Wet Tropics World Heritage boundary. And we're quite lucky that there is a World Heritage area there, because a lot of these other wind farms don't have World Heritage areas, and they don't have that pressure placed upon them like we have here with this Shulumban project.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the sort of forest that they've got to cut roads through to put the turbines in. And this is a picture of, Patricia and Phyllis on the site at Shulumban, to give a sense of, a sense of scale, So Trish, do you have your microphone working at the moment or no? No, you can't do it. Anyway, I'll keep moving. Is there anything you'd like to say, Georgina?
While you're there, just it seems to me, and I'd like to understand a little bit better how these companies and government, whether it's state, federal, conduct this environmental assessment before projects get approved, and how do you see that how do you believe that happens, or that's something we're not part of?
I think the issue with these projects is there's a lot of issues, but there's a really big issue at play here, which is offsets. And a lot of these projects are being approved because of the way that the offset system is set up under both state legislation and federal legislation. So, for example, with Shulumban, I can't remember exactly how much land to be cleared under the original project. The original footprint, there's 145 kilometres of brand new roads, just say 500 hectares. Well, if they're going to clear 500 hectares, well, then they need to offset 500 hectares plus more, maybe double that, somewhere else that contains similar vegetation communities and similar animals and wildlife. So, for example, here at Shulumban, we've got a thing called the magnificent brood frog, which is a really rare frog that's unique to the area, just found in this area. Greater gliders, even koalas. So what happens is, okay, well, the proponent says we're going to clear 500 hectares, but we'll set aside another 500 hectares over here, and that's our offset area. The problem with that is that the offset area is only protected for the duration of the life of the project. So if the project is decommissioned in 25 years' time, that offset area just goes back to either heavy grazing, or it can be logged or cleared or whatever. And that's how these projects are going through, because proponents can say, oh, well, we'll go and clear a 500 hectares over here, but we'll have 500 hectares over here as an offset. And that offset area was going to be an area that was never going to get cleared anyway. So
that doesn't make sense to me, Steven, but go on.
So I just want to talk quickly about other projects. And we hear a lot about the Kidston Pumped Hydro, and the Kidston Pumped Hydro is actually a great project where it utilises two old pits, mining pits, and the tailings dam is covered in solar panels. And everyone talks about how this is a great project, and on the face of it, it is. And this is stage one. But when we look at stage 2, it's around not 1,900 hectares of Fumita forest to be cleared for solar to make it all viable. And so we really got to be careful about some of these projects. And I believe in renewables. Renewables are a part of our solution, a part we need to decarbonise. But we need to do it in such a way, I think, that we utilise degraded land, land where there is consent, has consent with indigenous owners. And this is the sort of forest that needs to be cleared for solar panels. You know, and I'll also talk about, this is the Upper Burdekin wind farm. This is another one, the next one just south of Shullumbin. And this is a monster project. This is Tom Gert's Gugu Baden country. And basically all that land you see there beyond that extinct volcano, that's called Mount Fox, all that country will have turbines carved up into turbines. They actually found a red goshawk on this site, and the red goshawk is the holy grail of raptors in Australia. One of the best northern populations of koalas are found here, and this decision is sitting with Plebiscite right now. She'll be making a decision any day, and we're, you know, again, she'll probably approve it and go, oh, well, the offsets will offset the damage. But we're going to end up with big chunks of land being fragmented. These are photos I've taken on the site. Sharman's rock wallaby, rufous betongs, wedge-tail eagles. I think I can minimise. Can't see that. Sorry. There's rock art through the site. And again, we do our own mapping so you can sort of see the scale. And if we zoom out a bit, if we overlay this particular wind farm over the city of Cairns, it goes all the way from Palm Cove right down to Jirrbal. So a huge amount of land. I think about 160 kilometres of brand new roads. These rock piles will need to be, you know, blasted out basically to make way for the haulage roads. The site of this particular wind farm was earmarked to be a national park. So it was next in line for national park acquisition, next to the wet tropics. So that green area is the wet tropics World Heritage Area. And the idea was for national parks to slowly acquire some of that land along the western boundary because there's some really great wet sclerophyll forests. And that particular site, the Upper Burdekin Wind Farm site, was the next in line for national park acquisition. But now it's going to be a wind farm. And so we have to wonder, well, why is it all being built where it's being built? And it's all about the transmission lines. So here in North Queensland, those red lines are the transmission. And we can see that red area there, that's Mount Emerald Wind Farm. Then we had Caban Wind Farm. Then we've got the Shullumbin Wind Farm. Then the Upper Burdekin Wind Farm. And then the Mount Fox Wind Farm. And then below that, there's another 2 that we know of that we've just found out about recently, which is called Karma Wind Farm and the Hidden Valley Wind Farm. So that's what's happening in reality. But when we look at what the conservation sector wants, which I've been involved in for the last 30 years, is that they want the renewable projects put in places where there's low biodiversity. And I understand that. And we all want renewable projects put into areas of low biodiversity. So this is what the net zero team did. And net zero was a team of highly specialised professionals who looked at bioregions and vegetation mapping, and then configured a map that was going to be the optimal layout for the rollout of renewables in Australia to try to meet our carbon emissions. So this is their scenario for 2060, and this has been endorsed by the Climate Council and the Australian Conservation Foundation. And this is what the conservation sector wants. But in reality, this is what's happening in Queensland. So there's actually, I've got 109 projects here, but there's actually 111 projects in the pipeline. But in reality, they're being built hard up against the existing transmission infrastructure. So if we look at a spatial map of the whole state of Queensland, you can see all those red lines. They're all the proposed wind farms. And if we zoom in just between Rockhampton and Gladstone, we can see the red lines. They're all the wind farms proposed in between all the state forests and national parks. And then if we look at it in more detail, all the black lines here are the transmission lines. And then the first wind farm in this area that was approved was Clark Creek, and that was approved under Susan Ley, under the Morrison government. But then in the last 12 months, this is what's happened in this geographic area. So Lotus Creek, Boulder Creek, Mount Hopeful, Boomer Range, Specimen Hill, Collide Wind Farm, Banana Range Wind Farm, Caribou. So this is 12 months of, so that map there is what is currently planned between Rockhampton and Gladstone. This is the reality. And this was what frustrates me, is that we've got the conservation sector saying, well, we need all the renewable projects in areas of low biodiversity. But what's happening in reality is these wind farms are just cherry picking the cheapest locations that they can go to along existing transmission lines. And because all the approval processes are so streamlined and they're exempt from all the conservation and all the regulations that everybody else needs to abide by, this is just a one-off bonanza. And I would say it's one of the biggest land grabs in our lifetime. It's just epic. It's huge. And so if we dig down and look at some of these projects, so like I said, the first project that was approved under the Morrison government for this area, this is the Clark Creek Wind Farm. The stage 1 area is that area to the bottom. That's being bulldozed right now. So that's a Squadron Energy. That's a Twiggy Forest project. He's got bulldozers in there right now. Really great koala habitat. And you can see that it's going into green areas, which are remnant forests. So the white area is cleared land. Green is remnant. Yellow is of concern. And we've even got turbines going into of concern forests. A primary producer could never do that. You can't go into of concern forest and just clear land, but they can because it's a renewable project. With this particular project, this is the project on the ground. So again, you can see all the roads that are being pushed through. That photograph in the bottom left, no sediment control, no erosion control. Those photographs top right, again, just pushing material over the edge into the creeks. We've got no idea how amphibians are going to survive, the frogs. We've got no idea. With this particular project, Anglo American Coal have bought the certificates, the offset certificates for this project. So now Anglo American Coal have offsetted their scope 2 carbon emissions from their coal mining operations west of Rockhampton. So now they're carbon neutral, and Twiggy Forest has got a guaranteed income if he generates meaningful electricity or not. It doesn't matter. Yeah, so Lotus Creek, this is the bulldozers are moving in any day for Lotus Creek. This is a beautiful high elevation area. I get emotional looking at these images. I've been there 3 times now, spotlighting koalas everywhere. There was 101 koalas within the project footprint, 138 greater gliders. Every ridgeline you see in these photographs is going to be blasted out. I did a Google overlay, the photograph in the left, they're the haulage roads. So you can see the photograph on the right, that's a drone photo that I took. The tops of those ridge lines are going to get blasted out, flattened, and those black dots are where the turbines are going. Like I said, bulldozers are moving in there any day. And it just breaks my heart. This is just such beautiful remnant forests being cleared and decimated for renewable energy. We look at Boomer Range. Again, we've got turbines going into of concern forest. And then Moa Creek. Again, we've got turbines going into remnant, even into endangered dominant forests. I went up there in a helicopter, took photographs, and that every ridgeline you see here will have turbines on it. So that photograph in the top left, see that don't know how to use the laser pointer here. That little plateau here is surrounded by cliffs. There's actually a turbine going on that, and there's turbines going all along that ridgeline. If we look at solar, solar's a little bit better, but there's still some shocking solar farms. So this is called the Aldoga solar. So you can see that the footprint goes over some orange area. That's of concern vegetation. But they're going to clear that of concern vegetation, and the offset is going to be that photograph on the top, on the right-hand side. That purple and green is going to be the offset area for the clearing of the of concern forest for the solar farm. Now, that offset area is rugged, steep country that was never going to get cleared for anything else. And it was actually earmarked for national park anyway. And then you have to remember, with all these big industrial solar farms, we need to dig up more silica. And there's a lot of pressure on the silica resources in Cape York to dig up more silica to make more solar panels. And there's a bit of a battle going on right now up in Cape York, where there's a big silica mine just north of Cape Flattery. It's an area that has World Heritage values. It's earmarked for World Heritage nomination, yet a mining company wants to go there and dig it up for silica for the sole purpose of solar panel production. Yeah, so just going back to the 111 renewable projects, you know, we talk about renewable projects. You've got to remember with renewable projects that they only deliver 15 to 35% capacity factors. So all of that all those projects that I just showed you in that table will deliver, say, 22,000 megawatt, 22 gigawatt, but then you've got to times that by 15 to 35%. Assuming a 25% capacity factor, we're going to need to double that to try to get the so-called base load to power Queensland. So we're going to need about 220 wind farms and solar farms in Queensland to try to get to our 2050, 2060 targets. That also excludes all the critical mineral mining and rare earth mining. Yeah, I'll just put that up. Yeah, so there's approximately, if we count up all the turbines that are in the pipeline, there's 3,224 turbines that we've counted in the pipeline for Queensland, mostly along the Great Dividing Range of Queensland. And there's millions and millions of solar panels. So, for example, just one solar farm called Upper Calliope, the Upper Calliope solar farm, that's 2,700 hectares in size, and that has over 2 million panels, and each panel is over 5 meters wide. So, yeah, I won't talk about pumped hydro. That's another big issue. We've got there's the Upper Burdekin pumped hydro in the pipeline. That's regarded as the largest pumped hydro in the world. And I just heard Stephen Miles on the radio this morning talking about that. And even if we were to deliver those 220 renewable projects and all the pumped hydro, we're still going to need a network of gas peaking plants and carbon sequestration. And that is even said in the net zero report. So the net zero report that spatial map that I showed you earlier, even with all that infrastructure, we still need gas peaking plants to back it all up. I won't talk much about this because I'm actually getting this all peer reviewed at the moment. What I want to do is drill down into the exact areas of different regional ecosystems that are going to be cleared for these projects that are in the pipeline. But what we do know is that there's about 4,625 kilometres of new haulage roads proposed for all of those projects. So it's a huge amount of road infrastructure that needs to be developed and built. And a lot of that is in really remote, beautiful, rugged wilderness areas. So the total to be cleared in the pipeline is around 57,000 hectares of classified remnant and non-remnant. But I'm getting all that peer reviewed at the moment, and we'll clarify that exactly. In the State Energy and Jobs Plan, the State Government Jobs and Energy Plan, they're saying that we're going to need around 600,000 hectares of land for 10 gigawatt, but that's only for 35% capacity factor. So we're going to need to double or triple that, which means we're going to need about I can't remember now, about 1.6 million hectares of land. So that's what we need according to the government. That's their figures. And then if we talk about going over to electric transport, we're going to have to, basically double or triple that generation. If we want redundancy, we're going to need more capacity. And then we talk about hydrogen production, we're going to need to double that again. And then to become a green superpower, we're going to need even more renewables. And in the net zero report, it says very clearly that it's going to cost around 1.5 trillion by 2030 and 7 to 9 trillion by 2060 to try to achieve the targets that we need to achieve by 2060. And then the question might be asked, well, why do we need so much renewable? Why do we need so much? Because I thought simply at the start of my presentation, I talked about the Mount Emerald wind farm. And I thought, well, then we're now net zero. We're net zero. That wind farm was going to supply power to 70,000 homes. But if we look at the Mount Emerald wind farm for the year 2022, it actually delivers a dismal amount of electricity, really low capacity factors. So if you look at the median capacity factor for Mount Emerald, it only delivered 18.1% capacity factor for the year 2022. So for 63 days, it delivered 0%, no energy at all. And for 107 days, it delivered less than 10 megawatt of electricity. So that's why we need so many wind farms, to try to get that energy generation up because of its low capacity factor.
And Steven, someone's asking here, what's the life expectancy? I think I know the answer of these wind and solar projects, meaning when do they have to be removed or replaced?
Well, we don't know because we haven't got to the end of an industrial wind farm lifespan. But the proponents are saying these wind turbines will last 25 years. So we all just assume they're going to last 25 years. And the other thing is we don't know what the decommissioning plan is for any of these projects. There is no decommissioning plan. And we also, there is no environmental bond either. We don't know how these wind turbines are going to be decommissioned. Are they going to be oxy-torched at the bottom and dropped over like trees, or are they going to bring big cranes back in and bring them down like they put them up? So we don't know. We don't know. And then you'd assume in 25 years' time, there'll be new generation of wind turbines. So therefore, they won't fit onto the existing slabs. So they're going to have to put in new slabs. So put in new concrete batching plants, new slabs to put in new turbines, which means clearing all the vegetation again to bring in even bigger infrastructure. We don't know. So just going back to RACH, RACH in that year, 2022, they made $161 million, and they're now regarded as one of the top 100 companies in Australia that pay no tax. So we've got a wind farm generating not much meaningful electricity, but through the power purchasing agreements and certificates and offsets, they're doing okay. So my thoughts are, should we be clearing and fragmenting forests for renewable projects? Are we going down the wrong path that has failed elsewhere? Where is our model for 100% renewables, and which countries are carbon free? And it is a climate emergency. And because it's an emergency, I believe all our options need to be on the table. And there is great renewable projects. You know, there's rooftop solar. There is good industrial renewables in the right places with consent, in low biodiverse areas, in degraded land. There's community grids. There's all manner of really good renewable projects, which isn't really being addressed by the conservation groups or government. All we're hearing about is big wind and big solar. And there are other options, and none of those other options are being discussed. 75% of our coal and gas has to be replaced with green energy options. And what are the solutions? And like just like what I just said, good rooftop solar, community grids, and I've now come over to nuclear. I think nuclear is a part of our solution. And I was very anti-nuclear up until about 3 years ago. And it wasn't until I saw the Caban wind farm, then the Shulumban wind farm, and then Mount Fox wind farm, and then all these other wind farms. And then I started looking at capacity factors. Then I started looking at spatial footprints. And then I started looking at the fact that we need to string a lot of this together with new transmission. It all needs to be backed up with really expensive batteries, and then new gas peaking plants. And I had to put all of my ideology aside and go, I'll go back and revisit nuclear and look at the facts, because my ideology had been trained and directed and focused by the Australian Conservation Foundation and the Friends of the Earth. And I'd surrounded myself with all these people that told me that nuclear was unsafe and bad and weapons proliferation. But when you dig down into the facts, you quickly realise that a lot of that is just nonsense, and it's not true. And I agree that nuclear, as depicted in the media, appears to have some scary shortcomings, such as waste and radiation and slow rollout speed. However, my research has led me to understand I was misled about nuclear, and most, if not all, of the apparent scary shortcomings are not supported by the literature. And I now see nuclear as an important piece of the solution. And I don't expect everyone to agree with me. This is just my journey, my energy journey. And like I said at the start, I had no interest in energy at all, or electricity 6 years ago. And now it occupies a great deal of my time. And then when you look at nuclear, you know, there's some really great and prominent people out there that are advocating for nuclear. So people like James Hansen, who first warned of global warming in 1988. He's a really big advocate for nuclear. The Dalai Lama understands that the spatial footprint for renewables is so big and the energy density is so low, yet a real good way to get large populations out of poverty is nuclear. So nuclear is a great way to really get baseload power into developing nations with small footprints. James Lovelock, the author of the Gaia Hypothesis, he's written many times in books about nuclear is the only green solution. Dick Smith is someone who I highly admire. Even just recently, he was quite prominent in the media talking about nuclear. And even up here in North Queensland, a professor who I greatly admire, Bill Lawrence, he signed an open letter to environmentalists just recently saying that we need to have nuclear on the table, because he sees his profession is forest fragmentation around the world. And not only in Australia, but across other nations, we're seeing forests being fragmented by the rollout of wind farms. And he sees that as a really big threat going forward in developing nations, in particular, the fragmentation of rainforests and forests for wind farms. So there's a lot of people out there that have already clicked onto the fact that nuclear is a good solution. And I'm just sort of new to this, and I now agree wholeheartedly. Yeah. And I think, yeah, nuclear must be part of our solution. It eliminates the need for new transmission lines and provides enormous power generation in a tiny footprint. I don't see it as the only solution, but it's going to have to be a part of the solution to back up renewables. So we're going to need renewables. Renewables are always going to be there. We're going to have industrial scale renewables. But nuclear, I'd rather see nuclear backing up renewables than gas. So, that's my philosophy. Yeah.
Absolutely. We're going to need a solution. It's from your presentation, Steven, which thank you very much for, it opened my eyes. I did not understand very much what was happening in Queensland, in your backyard, Georgina and Trish, and in your area of the world, Steven, because I'm in Sydney and I don't have the opportunity to be that close to what's happening in the heart of the forest, really. So what I believe in is that, yes, we're confronted with having to reduce emissions quickly. But there must be other ways, as you said. There must be a way that we can bring principles of justice, equity, sustainability, and environmental principles and habitat protection in this transition. And that's probably what the renewable energy industry should aspire for their own sake, because every industry wants to succeed. And for them to succeed, they have to start thinking about the location of these projects a little bit better. And perhaps government has to start leading and deciding a little bit better on the viability of certain projects. And so the good projects go ahead, and the bad projects that will only create destruction will not go ahead, because they're not even generating, as you said, enough energy to justify the destruction. So in closing, which we've gone a bit over an hour, I would love to ask Georgina and Trish to say a few words and to tell us, have you actually spoken to other communities outside your community, and whether they share similar sentiments? Because I think that the most important thing for us as Australians, of course, respect the feelings and the communities of our First Nations people. And what I hear from you is that you haven't even been consulted in this process, which I sincerely hope that there will be a change in the hearts and minds of our government to be able to deal with approvals in a much better way than what's happened to you. So I'd like to ask both of you to just say a few last words to those who are watching, and to really tell us, what are other communities feeling, and what would you have done differently?
I think I have approached other communities that have Jirrbal people and Jirrbal elders there, and once they fully understand what it is that these energy companies want to do, the only word for it is first shock, and then it's heartbreak. Because a lot of these elders, they've lived out on that country. Their births, deaths, marriages, ceremonies happened on that country, and a lot of them witnessed it. And that's how the common people are missing this information, because it goes to the corporations that are supposedly there to look after country and the people, and they just go to these corporations and give them the information, but it's not all the information needed to make an informed decision. So these decisions are made without us even knowing the full extent of the project. And it's not something that we would ever agree to if we had a voice, if we were asked. And I think it's important that it's not just these corporations that get to make these decisions, because it affects the whole tribe, not just the corporation. The negotiations may affect the corporation, but the effect it has on the wider population, I think, is not worth the little tiny benefit the corporations get out of it. And these are the people taking control and making the decisions for us. It's not something easy to describe how we feel, It's Yeah.
Well,
It's an
thanks.
emotional roller coaster for us.
Thank you for sharing, Georgina, today. Steven, you're doing an amazing job, enlightening us and showing us the real truth of what's happening. Of course, it seems to me that a couple of things must change. One, the selection of sites. They have to be the appropriate sites for some energy projects that could benefit community, of course, and generate clean energy. But there has to be a much more strategic site selection, in my opinion, from what I just watched. Number two, I think conducting a much more comprehensive environmental assessment of these sites and areas where these projects are going, so it doesn't affect First Nations or biodiversity, the ecosystems that if we lose them, we'll never get them back, and that's the problem. And energy projects, we can move them and share them and send them somewhere else, and new technologies will come, but our biodiversity and our nature, we will never be able to replace once it's gone. And thirdly, obviously, from hearing Georgina and Trish, there has to be better community engagement, a more transparent way of communicating these projects, getting the input of everyone who's going to be affected around the project, from design, planning, implementation, and so on. And of course, I think a better policy framework. Just exempting projects because they're renewables without the proper assessment is not fair on anyone, and even on the industry itself. If I was representing their industry, I wouldn't want that privilege or that separate sort of treatment. I would prefer to be scrutinized like any other infrastructure project would. And so I think that's what we were here to discuss and to talk about. And hopefully your work, Steven, and your voices, Georgina and Trish, will be heard. And we're here to support. Coalition for Conservation is obviously worried about the environment. We're not funded by the renewables, nor the nuclear, nor any of the industries around. We're solely, dependent on philanthropic donors or people who like what we do. And we raise funds by doing events as well. But what we're hearing from lots of communities, and not just from your communities, the Kura Valley in Victoria is also suffering from similar problems, and it's another state, but similar problems as well, with lack of consultation and picking wrong sites where we believe there will be huge impact on nature. So we hopefully our voices will be heard, and there will be a much more just transition from now on, because it's not because we are trying to speed things up that we do things wrong. We'll have to think about this properly and do it well, so the future generations will benefit from all the investment that is happening in clean energy, instead of actually looking back and feeling, we did the wrong thing. So I hope to see you at some stage. And I really want to thank the three of you. Thank you so much for being here. And Steven, we will be sharing your presentation. There's a lot of people texting me and saying, I'd love to have a copy of that presentation. And it's really a no-brainer what you said, Steven, about nuclear energy and other types of solutions meanwhile, because nuclear is so far away from happening in Australia. But for example, behind the meter, solar for industrial, commercial, small grids and community grids and other things that can support local solutions for energy problems is what we have to do, and really bring communities along with us. So thank you so much, and hopefully we'll see you soon again. Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
Have a lovely day. Bye.
Thank you.